Hello and welcome to another edition of the MAPE podcast. Today, my guests are Dr. Spencer Riley and Lyndsey McClintic, and they will be discussing supporting multilingual learners through Tier 1 instruction. So, Spencer Riley and Lyndsey McClintic will be presenting on July 22nd at the Kellogg Center for a full day as part of the Multilingual Learner Summit. So, I'm excited to talk to them. Hello.
Nice.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Hi, yeah. So this is our first time with two guests, but I think we're adults and we can do this. So cheers to us. So again, your topic supporting MLs through Tier 1 instruction. What is the first thing that pops in your mind when you hear that phrase?
I think this is an area we've been doing a lot of work in our current school district. I think that it's easy for people to think about everything that we do with MLs as a separate thing, right? We want to send them to a place to get, instruction, or we view ELD as more of an intervention rather than part of their core instructional experience. And so for me, it's just thinking about inclusion. How do we get all of our students access to really high quality classroom experiences without sending them to a different location?
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, I think too, I've been to a lot of really wonderful PSYOP trainings, and I think sometimes teachers can see that and say, great news, there's 1,500 strategies that you can use to help your multilingual learners right now. And so really thinking about those like high leverage, high impact, but like low stress, low prep things that you can do to make content accessible to students all day long.
Yes, for sure. That's a big thing. And also, I think it's very important that, you differentiate between the overarching bigger ideas and then the sub strategies. Because I think people, if it's not always explained, like how things work. And again, when you're thinking about the process and the outcome of what you want to do, to think you have to do all these different strategies is just crazy and overwhelming. And so people don't do it.
Exactly. I think it's really easy for our classroom teachers to feel overwhelmed, even when they get some good training, because now they feel this pressure to do, I don't know, this really jam-packed lesson plan that has all 32 components, like Lyndsey said, and it's not possible, and it's actually not even the best thing for the students, right? We really want to focus on those strategies that are going to maximize the experience, really without overloading our teachers who already have so much to do.
I feel like recently we've done a little bit of a readjustment because there was a time when we were doing PSYOP training, all, 8 features, 30 components, a lot. And I think what we're seeing now is, especially with the mainstream teachers who always have that content that they have to consider too with everything, whereas, as ESL, ELD teachers, it's so we can focus on more of the things and it's more language based what we're doing. That it's easier to look at the subsections and really do those well. And, at some point you will reach all the PSYOP components, but doing it all at once for somebody who's new to the field is a bit too much at times.
Andrew, I like what you said about the content teachers needing to worry about the language too, right? So like I think we really come at it from a place of these strategies are essential for some, but beneficial for all, right? Like if you walk into a 10th grade biology class, right, those students are also going to need photosynthesis and all of those like high academic language vocabulary skills explained and made accessible. And so again, like through these strategies that we hope that we will present in this workshop, teachers will be able to see how they can make things accessible for all students in their classroom. Certainly essential for those multilingual learners.
It kind of grounded our planning as well for this workshop, like looking at the 8 components and knowing that not only does it sometimes overwhelm our teachers, and you mentioned newer practitioners feeling, especially stressed when they see how many PSYOP components there are. But on the other end, I've found that sometimes teachers who have a lot of experience are almost frustrated, like, why are we talking about lesson preparation? I do prepare my lessons. Why are we talking about assessment? I do assessments, right? So for us, we found over the years of doing a lot of different trainings like this that we really get the most bang for our buck with people if we focus on building background, comprehensible input, and interaction. And we try to weave those 3 components throughout the training, sometimes explicitly, like, hey, I'm teaching you a strategy right now, and sometimes just part of the fabric of the day where we're learning about something, but we're doing parts of those components as part of the experience.
Great. And so, yeah, you mentioned those 3, and definitely sometimes too, if you do focus on some, things fall into place under the others. So let's start with building background. What are some things there that are just very important that your content area teachers know and ways that you would like to support them?
I think visuals are a surprisingly easy and effective way to build background with kids. Again, I think people come into training almost worried, like, I like these strategies, but I don't know how to incorporate it in a way that doesn't feel prep heavy and then time intensive in the lesson, because we know they have to get through curriculum and pacing guides and everything as well. And with building background, it can really be as simple as like pulling up a picture or doing a very brief activity where you can see where the students are, add some information that they might be missing before you dive into the main lesson.
I would also add that I think in our workshop that we are kind of trying to differentiate between building background and also accessing prior knowledge. Just like always keeping that inclusive mindset in mind that our students, right, they do not have the language maybe in English to explain some of these things, that they are coming from rich cultural other backgrounds and other knowledge sources that they have. So just really differentiating between those two.
So yeah, building background, accessing prior knowledge. So correct me if I'm thinking about it in a way that's different than you are. Accessing prior knowledge are things that are already taught, and building background is more like life experience and cultural understanding.
Yeah, like I think with prior knowledge, you're trying to pull information that kids already have, and then building background, you're sort of gap filling. Like they might not have a skill that they need to jump right in. I'm thinking of, for accessing prior knowledge, I always think about Emily Francis. I know a lot of people have seen her speak and tell her story as a former English learner and a student who had a lot of gaps in her education. And she always talks about how people assumed that she didn't know anything. They thought she couldn't do any math because she hadn't attended school in a few years, and actually she had rich life experiences. She worked at her family's store. She knew lots and lots of things about math. So for us, that prior knowledge piece is like tapping into all the assets that our students do bring us, even when they have, might have some gaps in their learning. And then on the flip side, yeah, sometimes I think we dive into a text or a topic and they don't necessarily have the building blocks that they need to jump right in. I'm remembering a lesson I did with my own students where the kids came down with a text and it was very specific. It was about World War II and it was about some activities specifically that happened in Finland. And the teacher had already spent a lot of time on this text with them. And the first thing I asked them was like, well, do we know where Finland was? And it was a no. And it was, do we know what World War II was? And it was a no. And we needed to purposely build background so that they could understand the actual assignment.
Yeah, and again, there's a lot. So there's prior knowledge that are things that the teacher taught yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, where the student was there, or within the school system, so they know that they would have received that instruction. But when they come from another country, it's just not always aligned. We don't follow the same pacing, wherever we go. And again, but science and math is always going to be very similar because that's universal for the most part, I would say. But again, if they weren't in school, then they wouldn't have gotten it. But they do oftentimes bring a lot of this knowledge with them again, but we don't always know that. We don't have ways to see that. And again, if you're literally speaking two different languages, it can be really hard to discern what is known and what is not known. So let's move on to comprehensible input. What are some important things to know for teachers to know there?
I think we underestimate the power of just the delivery. Like, even if we have a lot of great scaffolds in place, if you're speaking quickly and just kind of moving through and assuming that all of the students are following along, you're missing a lot of people. And so really simple things that you have to do intentionally, like slowing your rate of speech and using gestures and adding those pictures in and repeating yourself, making the directions visually available so the students aren't guessing at what to do after you verbally shared them. We really try to focus on strategies like that. And I think that's something that we truly try to model throughout the session as well. Like, we have all of those things as just part of our teaching adults. And I think that immersive part of the experience can help teachers understand, the benefit of those practices for students.
Yeah, and I would say too, that's tied very heavily to the SIAP component of review and assessment, because if you're trying to gauge whether or not your output is comprehensible so that the input can be comprehensible, you have to understand how to gauge and how to monitor and how to let students know that they're ready to move on to the next concept or that they're good to go and those sorts of things. I just want to add too, because I'm from a K-5 background. So I feel like with elementary, it's more intrinsic in your general homeroom teacher, like to look at comprehensible input because, well, until they get to like the later grades, fourth and fifth, you really need to go very slow. Whereas secondary traditionally has been more content oriented, and we're moving that more and more over time towards looking at, more holistically, what are the learning needs of students, not just the content needs. So, I would say like for secondary teachers is sometimes a little bit more of a rethinking or rewiring or continuing of that process to really engage with students and fully, I get a strong sense of, again, what are they learning? What are they not learning? How can I fill in these gaps here, during the course of a given lesson?
Yeah, you make a good point about secondary for sure. It tends to be very content driven and content oriented. Um, I think also there's almost this misconception about that we teachers perpetuate, and that like we expect more of kids, I think, that even adults are capable of. We're constantly, telling people, I mean, in our district, we have a fifth and sixth grade building, and we're telling those kids, I'm not going to help you with this because you've got to get ready for middle school. And then at the middle school, it's like, you got to pull this together. This isn't acceptable. I'm getting you ready for high school. And then in high school, we're saying, I can't help you with this. We're getting you ready for college. And quite frankly, it's just not true. I mean, if you are in any adult space, if you give directions for something that some adults are supposed to be doing in a meeting and you don't write them down, they're not going to know what to do. And, we've seen, in implementing our own PD, Lyndsey and I both, when the directions are visually available, even that small piece, you release a group of adults to do directions. And I mean,
Oh, yeah.
how many of them look up, what are we doing? Hold on. And they use that scaffold to engage. And I don't know why we expect it of kids when it's something that just really everybody needs to be successful.
Yeah, and I think Spencer is speaking to, right, like just kind of the danger of pulling some of those scaffolds away too soon. And we talk about that also in the workshop when you think about, what is it? Almost half of Michigan multilingual learners are like considered long-term Ls, right? Like 5+ years. So like just the fact that teachers sometimes say, well, they can speak, so they are fine, right? But again, that academic level of proficiency, we're not quite there yet. And so making sure that we've got these strategies in our toolbox to pull out to make sure that content is accessible.
Yeah, so also there's a difference between output and input as well. Sometimes maybe they're being very selective about when they're speaking, so it can seem somewhat misleading, what they actually know or their ability to comprehend. I mean, there's many layers to that. So yes, it definitely deserves attention. So you also had interaction. Now there's a big one, and again, it's just very different. You just have I feel like there's some teachers, so between elementary and primary to secondary, I don't think there's as much a divide as far as individual teachers and what they do. Some are just more oriented towards having a classroom where it's participatory and it's more of a, for lack of a better word, communal experience, whereas others are just very content, sharing the knowledge and letting students take away from the knowledge that is given to them. So what are some pointers that you would give teachers, or what do you notice when you go into a secondary classroom in terms of interaction? What does the spread look like?
Honestly, I think this is a challenge K-12. We really want all students to have regular opportunities to speak. Meaning is made through the interaction. I can listen to someone all day, but I'm not really going to develop my own skills and retain unless I'm interacting with other people in the room about the topic. And, again, teachers are busy. There's a lot going on. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of like, I'm going to call on the same 3 kids that are raising their hands so we can move this along. So we really try to emphasize strategies that get all kids interacting in a low stakes way that doesn't feel stressful, but they do have that opportunity for verbal output and meaning making. And the other thing we like to take into consideration really throughout this PD is the idea that like it's important to know the cultures that you're serving in your classroom. So for example, Lyndsey and I work in a district that has a really large East Asian population, especially students from Japan, China, and Korea. And those students are coming from classrooms where participation is not the norm. You need to sit quietly and take your notes, right, so that you're ready for the test. And they're very uncomfortable and unsure in American classrooms, when even in classrooms where the teacher has so many opportunities for participation, they might be missing them because of some cultural pieces. And so knowing that and being able to teach to it explicitly and say like, hey, I know in Japan, this is the norm, and here's what we're doing here, and here's how I'm going to help you get comfortable and start participating in a way that makes sense for you.
And how important is it too for, students to just be able to like have new ideas, get new perspectives, and honestly, sometimes, especially for newer proficiency students, hear those language models from their peers. So just like the opportunity to interact is so important for that meaning making.
Yeah. I remember seeing this quote, which I feel like when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's profound. And now it's like, well, duh, like who doesn't know this? But the ones doing the talking are the ones doing the learning. And I just think that's so important. And the extension of that, I think, is the one, it's about making meaning. Like you can't just have an instructor, warp down upon you this fixed idea of what the knowledge is. You have to allow students to create their own meaning. And a big part of that is to have them interact and work together and talk with one another.
Yeah, we often say like the one doing the talking is the one doing the learning. And sometimes if you time like who's doing the talking and the heavy lifting of the learning in the classroom, it's the adult. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I love that you love this and you're excited about it.
Mhm.
And you know it. You have a degree in it, right? Especially for secondary. Like you're here because you love history or you love math and that's your thing. But like how are we getting the kids using the language and using the learning in a way where they can contextualize it for themselves and be able to produce it in more of an application-based setting?
And I'll piggyback on that again and just bring it back to the workshop, right? And so the ones that, as you both have said, right, the ones doing the talking are the ones doing the learning. So this will not be a sit and get, right, a full day workshop. We will be interacting. We will be working with different partners to kind of model what that looks like, as Spencer said earlier, right, to give them that immersive experience. Like this is what this can look like in your classroom. With, we will have adult topics. We will be reading third grade passages. We'll be reading things, right, potentially on additional cultural competency and the adult learning, but the strategies can be put back into your classroom and in your context.
So yeah, and so it is extension of that. What would you say to a teacher who has not traditionally been, and maybe they've been in the field for a little while? They're more accustomed to lecturing, and then they try some of these strategies as far as interaction, and it doesn't work for them. It doesn't go well. What advice would you give to them, or what can you imagine a scenario to create around this, or what do you have to say to that topic?
Well, I think the model of the session helps because we do get to like experience it. And I think that that's more powerful than reading sometimes, like seeing a teacher run a strategy and being like, okay, I feel confident now. Maybe I can go back and do this in my classroom. But for teachers that are, feeling less than confident about a strategy, I think this is another area where there's a disconnect where we're telling our students one thing and we're expecting another. It takes practice. It takes a lot of time to sometimes teach those routines to students and for teachers to make adjustments to a strategy to figure out what makes the most sense for them and what feels good in the context of their classroom, with their age group, with their students. Sometimes we are really quick to try and drop strategies. And we know that like it's hard to know if something is working if it's always the one and done. Even when we're trying new things to support students, if you do, 7 new strategies in a 3-day period and you're like, gosh, nothing's working, I have to find an 8th strategy. Try one thing and stick with it for a while. Practice it, refine it, use it over time, and then make a decision about whether or not it's working for your students.
Yeah, and I would add too, there's a lot of teachers, and I fall into this category of, like, for lack of a better word, perfectionism. Like you want things to go a certain way, and also when it's teacher centered and then you really have control over what happens during the course of a lesson. Whereas when you give over that control, again, that can be a lot to handle. And I think there's kind of some teachers come to this initially with a certain misconception about like equity among students, that every student is going to talk the exact same amount of time and get the exact same thing out of it. But, it's always going to be, a group of 4 working together, is the output is going to look very different than if they all worked individually. And I think ultimately that's a very good thing. But also with time, you can look at groups and you say, okay, well, I feel like, again, these students are kind of dominating, but there's strategies for that too. So sometimes that's like the next step in learning how to do this particular strategy effectively. If you're doing group work, how can you assign things? How can you set things up so that there's some of that built in where all students are participating, but again, it's never going to be every student exactly equal. It's going to be a group thing. Group things are always, depending on the circumstance, depending on the activity, it's going to be give and take, and that's okay.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation this morning with someone about teachers
Hey,
as
look
a
at that.
group of people who tend to be, your type A school loving rule followers. Many of them
Hmm.
had great experiences as a student themselves. And yeah, they are seeking perfection and they're really hard on themselves. And in our department, we say all the time, like, nothing is unfixable. Like, try it. And if it doesn't go well, great. Either try it again or try something else, right? Like, it's okay. And sometimes I feel like teachers just need that permission of like, it's okay if it's not perfect, and participation is going to look different for different kids over different periods of time. Again, we serve a population that's very reluctant to participate, and sometimes a good first step is that they're writing their answer before they're comfortable speaking their answer, or they're going to talk to one person before they talk to five people. And those little improvements are still improvements, and it's okay if not everyone is, has a 3 paragraph speech that they're ready to share with their whole class in a Socratic seminar.
Yeah, I think the additional advice I would give, right? I think we talked about, starting small, sticking with it, adjusting it, not throwing it away. And then, there's also the, Maslow before Bloom. So you got to know your kids. You need to find ways to lower that affective filter and make sure that students feel comfortable having those participation opportunities if you want that learning to deepen overall. And it's worth it in the long run. Stick with it, adjust, don't throw it away.
Sometimes teachers get frustrated about growth, and growth takes time too. If you have a newcomer student, we often get feedback. I know, Lyndsey, you hear it from your teacher sometimes too, where they're like, oh my gosh, this student is only doing this. And you're like, well, she got here 6 weeks ago, and that's
Hmm.
great. It's okay that she's only writing one sentence right now, and some of the permission for those things too, where like they're not going to go from 0 to 100 overnight in a couple months. Language acquisition is a slow, steady process.
And I would say along those lines too, sometimes when you're doing work, you assign your groups or you assign your partners according to that. Because there are some kids like they are just going to watch, but sometimes if you are able to see them how they watch, like they're learning more than anybody else, watching their peers go through this process, seeing them as they write words, seeing them as they develop language. And that's that's okay. That's good a lot of the time too.
Yeah, triads are okay too, right? So we could have those language models in a group of 3, right? It doesn't always have to be one and one, and it's going to be equal. And it's going to be equal sharing time. Like we can have a third person who's really going to sit and listen and learn what it looks like in this classroom or in this content area, and then continue to join in as they feel more comfortable and learn more language. If you're talking about a newcomer student.
And we know those receptive skills develop first. So they do need the opportunity to listen and observe and, build those skills. And we talk a lot, Lyndsey saying triad for any grouping. We love to have a bonus partner, right? If you have, even a 4-person group and each one of those 4 is like a weight bearing part of the participation grade that day, your newcomer can be a 5th. Maybe he can double up on one of those areas. Maybe he's just observing. Maybe he's drawing as they're talking. And just having the flexibility to say that those little nuances and not everybody needing 100% of what the expectation was is totally fine.
Great. So we talked about building background, comprehensible input, and interaction. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before about your session or about these ideas and how they tie together?
Well, I think the through line also with all of this for us is culturally responsive instruction. And we really try to embed that in the work that we're doing. So we are learning strategies or we're practicing a strategy, but we're also really thinking and learning about how to learn the cultures of our students, because that can be a challenge, especially as districts become super diverse, right? It's the bilingual instruction is becoming less and less possible in some of our contexts. We in our district have about 75 different languages. And so sometimes for teachers that can feel overwhelming too. Like, how am I supposed to know about all of these? But there are a lot of things you can do that don't require deep research about 75 different languages and backgrounds.
Yeah, you don't have to
Your
do that.
students. Yeah, in a way that's meaningful and helps them with that access to the content as well.
All right. So thank you so much for joining me today. And again, July 22nd at the Kellogg Center, day 1 of the Michigan ML Summit. And this 22nd will be the 2 of you. So just one room all day. And then the 23rd will be a more traditional conference where we have a keynote, Carly Spina, who's been coming to Mabe and is wonderful. And then breakout sessions and then note and all that good stuff. So definitely, if people are able, I would recommend attending that and telling their colleagues as well. So thanks so much again for joining me, and we will see you in July.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.